In the quiet days before the invasion, humanity was on the verge of a new golden age. Wars had become rare. The global economy was thriving, and technology was advancing at a pace that filled even the most cynical among us with hope. Space exploration had pushed the boundaries of human knowledge, with colonies on the Moon and Mars beginning to take shape. For the first time in human history, we believed that we were truly unstoppable, destined to conquer the stars ourselves. Then they arrived. At first, it was nothing more than an anomaly, a faint signal detected by astronomers in a remote observatory in South America, a blip on the edge of our solar system. It moved too fast to be a comet, too erratic to be an asteroid. For weeks, the world's best scientists debated its origin, analyzing the data, trying to explain this strange phenomenon. Some even speculated it might be an alien probe, but that seemed like a wild fantasy, a relic of old science fiction. But as the anomaly came closer, the reality began to set in. This was no natural occurrence. It was something far more deliberate. The anomaly resolved into a fleet of massive alien vessels, ships the size of cities, traveling with impossible precision and speed. Panic spread across every major scientific institution on the planet. They scrambled to find answers, to understand the technology behind these ships, and more importantly, they scrambled to prepare for what might come next. Governments around the world went into crisis mode. Military forces were put on high alert. Satellites, drones, and probes were launched to observe the incoming fleet, hoping for some clue, some indication of intent. There was a brief moment of hope, a fleeting belief that these visitors might be peaceful, that they might come to share knowledge with us, to usher in a new era of interstellar cooperation. But that hope was crushed the moment they entered Earth's atmosphere. The first time humanity encountered the invaders' technology, it was like witnessing magic. It defied everything we thought we knew about physics, engineering, and the limits of technological progress. When their ships descended from the sky, shimmering with strange, pulsing energy, it was as if we were watching gods materialize from the heavens. These were not the clunky spacecraft we had envisioned in our science fiction. No, these ships were works of art, sleek, smooth, and massive, stretching miles across, hovering silently in the skies above our cities. At first we tried to communicate with them, to reach out with signals, messages, and broadcasts, but there was no response. The invaders did not come to talk. They came to conquer. Their ships moved in ways we couldn't comprehend. Gravity seemed to mean nothing to them. They floated effortlessly, without a single puff of exhaust, no sound, no visible propulsion. They defied everything our best scientists knew about aerospace engineering. And that was just the beginning. The first strike came without warning. A single beam of light, brilliant and blinding, cut through the atmosphere, connecting one of their ships to the ground below. Within seconds, entire city blocks evaporated, reduced to smoldering rubble. We didn't even hear the explosion until moments later, after the shockwave hit. By then, it was already too late. The destruction was incomprehensible. Buildings that had stood for decades were gone, reduced to dust. People vanished in an instant. But this wasn't some crude, indiscriminate attack. It was precise, surgical. The invaders' weapons could vaporize a skyscraper without damaging the buildings around it. They didn't waste energy. They didn't waste time. Their attacks were calculated, efficient, and devastating. We threw everything we had at them. Missiles, fighter jets, tanks, nothing worked. Our weapons, our pride and joy, our technological achievements, all bounced harmlessly off their energy shields. At first, we didn't even understand what was happening. We fired nukes, conventional bombs, even the most advanced kinetic weapons we had developed. And yet, not a single dent. Their shields rippled with energy, deflecting everything we sent their way. These weren't like the shields we'd imagined in science fiction. They weren't just invisible barriers blocking our attacks. They were intelligent, adaptive. The moment we fired a missile, the shields reacted, reshaping themselves, focusing their energy on the point of impact. It was as if the ships themselves were alive, thinking, responding in real time. The second wave of destruction was even worse than the first. Alien drones, sleek and deadly, descended from the ships, flooding the skies like a swarm of locusts. They were small, about the size of a motorcycle, but they moved with terrifying speed and precision. Each one equipped with energy weapons that could slice through steel like butter. They had no need for pilots, no need for control towers or air bases. The drones operated autonomously, controlled by some kind of advanced AI system we couldn't even begin to comprehend. And then there were the walkers, massive, four-legged machines that towered over the ruins of our cities. They moved slowly, methodically, each step sending tremors through the ground. Their legs were reinforced with some kind of alien alloy, impenetrable to even our strongest artillery. But it was their weapons that made them truly fearsome. Mounted on their backs were pulse cannons, capable of disintegrating anything in their path with a single shot. We fought back as best we could. Soldiers on the ground, tanks rolling through the streets, anti-aircraft batteries firing desperately into the skies. But nothing worked. Our best fighter jets couldn't get close enough to the alien ships without being cut down by the drones. Our tanks were crushed under the feet of the walkers, reduced to scrap metal in seconds. It wasn't just their weapons that made them dangerous. It was their efficiency. Every attack was calculated, every strike perfectly timed. The invaders didn't fight like us. They didn't make mistakes. They didn't hesitate. They didn't retreat. And worst of all, they didn't seem to tire. No matter how hard we hit them, they just kept coming, relentless, unstoppable. With the world's militaries decimated and conventional warfare proving utterly useless, humanity had to find a new way to fight. We couldn't match the aliens in technology, and we certainly couldn't outgun them. But there was something we could do, something we had done before. When faced with a superior force throughout history, humanity has turned to one reliable strategy: guerrilla warfare. This wasn't a war of vast armies clashing on open battlefields. This was a war of shadows, of hit-and-run tactics, of ambushes and sabotage. For the invaders, it was a game they didn't understand. War fought on unfamiliar ground, with rules they couldn't predict. Resistance cells formed across the globe. Some were made up of soldiers, veterans of wars long past, men and women who knew how to fight, how to survive. Others were civilians, engineers, mechanics, even farmers. They didn't have the training, but they had the will. And when the time came, they fought just as fiercely as any soldier. In the rubble of destroyed cities, in the dense jungles of South America, in the deserts of the Middle East, resistance fighters used the environment to their advantage. The invaders, with all their technology, weren't prepared for this kind of warfare. Their drones and walkers were designed for open combat, for large-scale battles against armies. But guerrilla warfare? That was something else entirely. In the cities, human fighters moved through the ruins like ghosts, using the maze of destroyed buildings and crumbling infrastructure to launch ambushes on alien patrols. They set up traps, homemade explosives rigged from scavenged materials. An alien walker would march down a street, towering over the debris, its pulse cannons ready to fire at any target that dared oppose it. But just as it passed under an overpass, the bridge would collapse, sending tons of concrete and steel crashing down on the machine. Its legs would buckle, its systems failing under the weight, and before it could recover, human fighters would swarm it, planting explosives and disappearing into the shadows before reinforcements could arrive. Urban warfare became a nightmare for the invaders. Their advanced sensors couldn't pick up the heat signatures of resistance fighters hiding deep underground, in subway tunnels or basements. Their drones were fast and deadly in the open, but in the narrow streets of ruined cities, they were vulnerable. Snipers, hiding in the remains of skyscrapers, picked off the drones one by one, using scavenged alien tech to cloak their positions from the invaders' scanners. In the jungles of Southeast Asia and South America, the terrain itself became an enemy for the invaders. Their massive machines and aerial drones had difficulty navigating the dense forests. Human fighters, on the other hand, knew these jungles like the backs of their hands. They laid traps, pits filled with sharpened stakes, mines made from alien debris, tripwires connected to explosive charges. Alien patrols would walk into these traps one by one, and before they could react, they were torn apart by explosions or speared by the very jungle itself. The jungle offered something the invaders couldn't predict: unpredictability. Fog and mist rolled in, hiding human movements. Animals, unseen by the invaders' drones, moved through the undergrowth, triggering sensors and causing confusion among the alien forces. And then, in the dead of night, human fighters would strike. Silent, quick, and deadly, they would take out patrols, sabotage alien equipment, and disappear before the drones could lock onto their positions. The deserts became another front in this new kind of war. In the vast open expanses of the Middle East and North Africa, human fighters used the heat and the sand to their advantage. The invaders' sensors struggled in the desert heat, their technology unable to differentiate between the scorching sand and the human bodies moving through it. Resistance fighters, covered in cloaks that blended with the desert landscape, moved like phantoms through the dunes. They knew that engaging the invaders directly was suicide, so they relied on sabotage and misdirection. A convoy of alien walkers would march across the desert, seemingly unstoppable. But just beneath the surface, human fighters had buried explosives, wired to detonate when the first machine stepped onto the sand. The explosions would send the walkers tumbling, their legs shattered, and before the invaders could recover, the fighters would strike, using the confusion to plant more bombs and disable the machines. It wasn't just physical traps that the resistance used. Psychological warfare became a key tactic in guerrilla warfare. The aliens, for all their intelligence, didn't understand the human mind. They didn't understand deception, misdirection, or unpredictability. Resistance fighters exploited this to devastating effect. False radio signals were broadcast across occupied territories, leading alien patrols into ambushes. Holographic decoys were set up in the streets, tricking drones into firing on phantom targets, while the real fighters moved unnoticed through the ruins. Even the environment itself was turned against the invaders. In places where rivers flowed, dams were rigged to burst, sending torrents of water crashing down on alien bases, drowning their machines and cutting off supply routes. The key to guerrilla warfare was mobility. The resistance couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. The invaders had superior technology, superior firepower, and they could locate static targets with ease. But they couldn't catch what they couldn't see. Resistance cells never stayed in one place for more than a few days. They moved constantly, setting up temporary bases in abandoned factories, subway tunnels, forests, and caves. Communication between cells was sparse but effective. Radio silence was the rule, except in emergencies. Messages were passed through runners, people who moved across enemy lines, traveling by night, carrying information from one cell to another. These runners knew every hidden path, every underground tunnel, every route that could evade the invaders' sensors, and as a result, the resistance remained connected, even in the chaos. What the invaders didn't understand was that humanity's greatest strength had always been its adaptability. We were a species that had survived for millennia by learning to adapt to changing circumstances, by using our environment to our advantage, by thinking outside the box. And in this new war, that adaptability was our greatest weapon. Where the invaders relied on overwhelming firepower and technological superiority, humanity relied on ingenuity, creativity, and a refusal to give up. We didn't need to win massive battles. We didn't need to destroy their ships or crush their armies. We just needed to make the occupation as difficult as possible. Every hit-and-run attack, every ambush, every act of sabotage chipped away at their forces, at their resources, at their morale. The invaders thought they could subdue us with brute force. They thought their machines would break our spirit, but what they failed to realize was that we were fighting for something far more valuable than territory or power. We were fighting for our survival, for our planet, for our future. And when backed into a corner, humanity had always been at its most dangerous. The guerrilla war spread like wildfire. What started as a few small, isolated cells of resistance grew into a global network. Fighters from all walks of life, soldiers, civilians, hackers, engineers, came together to resist the invaders in every corner of the world. Each attack, no matter how small, was a victory. Each ambush, a reminder to the invaders that we were still here, that we would not go quietly into the night. The invaders may have had the technology, they may have had the firepower, but they didn't have our determination, they didn't have our creativity, and they didn't have our spirit. This was a war they couldn't win with brute force alone. because in the shadows, in the ruins, in the forests and deserts of Earth, humanity had become the most dangerous enemy they had ever faced. While guerrilla tactics were keeping the invaders on their toes, humanity's brightest minds were working on another plan. It was clear from the beginning that we couldn't win this war with brute force alone. We didn't have the firepower or the resources to go head-to-head with the invaders' advanced technology. But what we did have was the ability to learn, to innovate, and to adapt. And that's exactly what we did. The first pieces of alien technology we encountered were wreckage, bits and pieces of drones shot down in urban firefights, or fragments of their walkers destroyed in guerrilla ambushes. Initially, our scientists and engineers were baffled. The materials were unlike anything they had ever seen, metals that seemed to bend the laws of physics, energy sources that could power entire cities, and computing systems far beyond the most advanced AI on Earth. But we didn't give up. It was slow, painstaking work, but over time, we began to understand bits and pieces of their technology. At first, it was small victories, understanding how their energy shields worked, figuring out how their drones communicated with each other, breaking down the composition of their armor. But even these small breakthroughs were monumental. One of the first major breakthroughs came when we discovered a way to disrupt their energy shields. These shields were what made their ships, drones, and walkers nearly invincible. Every time we launched an attack, the shields would absorb or deflect the damage, rendering our weapons useless. But as we studied the wreckage of a downed drone, we noticed something. The shields weren't impenetrable. They were powered by a specific type of energy that had a frequency. And like any frequency, it could be disrupted. Scientists worked around the clock, developing a makeshift EMP device that could overload the shield's energy field. Using scavenged alien power cells and jury-rigged human technology, they created a crude but effective weapon, an electromagnetic pulse that, when detonated near an alien machine, would temporarily disable its shield, leaving it vulnerable to attack. The first time we tested it, the results were spectacular. A single EMP blast took down the shield of a towering alien walker, allowing resistance fighters to rush in with explosives and destroy the machine. It was a small victory, but it sent a powerful message. Their technology wasn't invincible. It could be beaten. The first time we tested it, the results were spectacular. A single EMP blast took down the shield of a towering alien walker, allowing resistance fighters to rush in with explosives and destroy the machine. It was a small victory, but it sent a powerful message. Their technology wasn't invincible. It could be beaten. With this breakthrough in hand, humanity grew bolder. It wasn't just the shields we began to understand. We also started to reverse engineer their weapons. Alien energy rifles were salvaged from battlefields, studied, and bit by bit, understood. We couldn't replicate them, not fully, but we could modify them. Engineers figured out how to convert alien power cells to work with human weapons, boosting their firepower. Soldiers in the field began using scavenged alien tech to create hybrid weapons. Energy rifles capable of piercing alien armor, powered by a mix of human ingenuity and alien technology. The turning point came when we hacked into their drones. The invaders' drones had always been one of our greatest challenges. Fast, agile, and deadly, they operated without human pilots, controlled by an advanced AI that coordinated their movements. But we discovered something critical. The drones communicated with each other through a wireless network, and that network could be breached. It wasn't easy. Alien encryption was far more advanced than anything we had seen before, but human hackers were relentless. Working in dark basements, hidden bunkers, and makeshift labs, they attacked the network, probing for weaknesses, looking for ways in. And after months of trial and error, they succeeded. The first hack was small, just a single drone, but that drone was enough. Once we had access, we could reverse engineer their communication protocols. And before long, we had the ability to take control of the drones themselves. In one of the first major operations using this newfound ability, a resistance cell in Eastern Europe hacked into a squadron of alien drones patrolling a key supply route. Instead of destroying them, the hackers turned them against their own forces. The drones, under human control, attacked an alien convoy, raining destruction on their own machines. The aliens had no idea what had happened. The chaos was total, and in that moment, we had turned the invaders' own technology into our greatest weapon. The ability to hijack their drones was a game-changer. No longer were we simply on the defensive. We could now strike back in ways the invaders hadn't anticipated. Human engineers developed systems that could take control of alien drones in the field, redirecting them to attack their own bases, their own machines. Entire squads of alien forces were wiped out by their own technology before they even realized what was happening. This wasn't just happening in one part of the world. Across the globe, resistance cells were learning to repurpose alien technology. In South America, a group of engineers developed a way to tap into the invaders' energy grid, using their power sources to recharge human weapons and equipment. In Africa, scavengers pieced together the remains of alien walkers, creating mobile fortresses powered by alien engines but piloted by human hands. On the outskirts of the old tech capitals, places like Silicon Valley, Tokyo, Berlin, scientists and hackers worked around the clock, using every scrap of alien tech they could find. They set up secret labs, hidden from the invaders' sensors, where they dissected every piece of wreckage, every drone, every fragment of an alien ship they could get their hands on. It wasn't just about creating weapons either. We also learned to use their technology to heal, to protect. Alien medkits designed for their own kind were repurposed to treat human wounds. Their power cells were used to run underground hospitals, keeping life-saving machines running even as the invaders tried to cut off our resources. We turned their tech into shields, using their own materials to reinforce our bunkers, creating barriers that could withstand their attacks. The invaders had come to Earth thinking they could dominate us with their superior technology, but they underestimated humanity's ability to adapt. For every piece of their tech we captured, we found a way to use it against them. We were no longer just scavenging for survival. We were turning their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The invaders' technology, which had once seemed so incomprehensible, was now in our hands. And what we couldn't fully understand, we improvised. We found ways to make their weapons work for us, ways to disable their shields, ways to hack their drones. For every system they deployed, we found a countermeasure. For every weapon they created, we found a way to turn it back on them. What the invaders never realized was that their biggest advantage, technology, was also their most significant vulnerability. They relied on it completely, and they couldn't imagine a scenario where their own weapons would be used against them. But humans were different. We had spent centuries perfecting the art of war, and part of that art was knowing how to use your enemy's strength against them. As the war dragged on, humanity's mastery over alien technology grew. What had started as small, isolated acts of defiance, hacking a single drone, disabling a single shield, became a coordinated global effort. Resistance cells shared knowledge, pooling their discoveries, refining their techniques. We were no longer just reacting to the invaders' attacks. We were planning our own. And the more we understood their technology, the more dangerous we became. The invaders had come to Earth expecting an easy victory. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated our ability to learn, to adapt, to evolve. And now, the very technology they had used to subjugate us was being used to tear down their empire. What had once been their greatest weapon had become their greatest liability. The invaders, for all their technological superiority, had one critical weakness. They didn't understand us. They didn't understand the way humans thought, the way we approached problems, or how deeply unpredictable we could be. To them, everything was a calculation, a cold, logical equation. They operated like machines, processing data, assessing risk, and making decisions based on predictable patterns. At first, the resistance was purely physical: ambushes, sabotage, guerrilla warfare. It was all about taking down the invaders' machines, disrupting their operations and chipping away at their forces. But as the war dragged on, we began to notice something about our enemies. They didn't respond the way humans did. They didn't react with emotion or instinct. They were cold, mechanical, calculating. And that was something we could exploit. The invaders' rigid mindset was their greatest flaw. While we were unpredictable, changing tactics, adapting on the fly, The invaders followed a strict set of protocols. They relied on their superior technology and overwhelming firepower to win battles. They assumed that once they deployed their forces, the outcome was all but certain. But they didn't account for the human factor. They didn't account for deception. The first successful act of psychological warfare came early in the conflict, when a small resistance group managed to jam the communications between two alien patrols in an occupied city. Using basic signal interference, they made it seem as though the patrols were under attack, when in reality, no human forces were nearby. The invaders, thinking they were being ambushed, redirected their forces to the area, wasting resources and leaving another key location vulnerable to a real attack. That simple act of deception opened the door to a whole new kind of warfare. It wasn't just about outgunning the invaders anymore. It was about outthinking them. Human hackers and communications experts began working on ways to disrupt the invaders' command structures, feeding them false information, jamming their signals, and creating chaos in their ranks. One of the most effective strategies was the use of decoy signals. At first, the hacks were small, redirecting a patrol here, disrupting a drone flight there. But as the resistance grew bolder, the hacks became more ambitious. False orders were sent to alien commanders, instructing them to abandon key positions or to engage in unnecessary resource-draining maneuvers. The invaders, unable to distinguish between real and false orders, were forced to waste valuable time and resources chasing phantom threats. And it wasn't just about creating chaos on the battlefield. The invaders, for all their cold, logical efficiency, weren't immune to the psychological toll of war. While humans were used to conflict, to uncertainty, to the constant push and pull of battle, the invaders were not. They expected swift, decisive victories. They expected to crush us in a matter of days, maybe weeks. But as the war dragged on, as the resistance continued to defy them, the invaders began to experience something they hadn't planned for: doubt. Human psychological warfare wasn't just about confusing their sensors or hacking their networks. It was about breaking their will to fight. We didn't just hit them where it hurt physically, we hit them where it hurt mentally. They had come to Earth expecting an easy victory, but instead they found themselves trapped in a long, grinding war they didn't understand. And the longer we fought, the more unpredictable we became. Humans, unlike machines, thrive in chaos. We are creatures of emotion, of instinct, of creativity. The invaders, for all their advanced technology, couldn't understand this. They couldn't predict what we would do next, because we didn't always know ourselves. One day we would strike with overwhelming force, hitting key installations in coordinated attacks. The next day we would disappear completely, leaving them to wonder where we had gone. This unpredictability drove the invaders to desperation. They began overcommitting their forces, sending massive armies to deal with minor threats while ignoring the real danger lurking just beyond their sensors. Every time they thought they had us pinned down, every time they believed they had finally gained the upper hand, we slipped through their fingers like smoke, and that unpredictability became one of our greatest weapons. At the same time, psychological warfare strengthened the resistance. Knowing that we could confuse the invaders, that we could outwit them, gave us hope. It gave us the strength to keep fighting, even when the odds were stacked against us. Every successful deception, every misdirected patrol, every hacked communication reminded us that, despite their overwhelming power, the invaders were vulnerable. They could be beaten, not by matching their firepower, but by outthinking them. One of the most daring examples of psychological warfare came during the siege of Berlin. The invaders had surrounded the city, cutting off all supplies and bombarding the remaining human forces with relentless drone attacks. It seemed like the city would fall, just as so many others had before it. But the resistance had a plan. Using hacked alien communications, they sent a false distress signal to the invaders, claiming that a high-ranking alien commander had been captured by human forces and was being held in a bunker just outside the city. The invaders, desperate to recover their commander, redirected a significant portion of their forces to the bunker's location. But when they arrived, all they found was an empty, booby-trapped building. Meanwhile, the real human forces in the city launched a counterattack, taking out several key alien installations and escaping before the invaders could regroup. The siege of Berlin didn't end in a human victory, but it proved one thing. We could manipulate the invaders. We could make them dance to our tune. As the war continued, psychological warfare became a cornerstone of the resistance's strategy. We didn't just fight the invaders on the ground. We fought them in their minds. We exploited their fear of the unknown, their reliance on logic, and their inability to understand human unpredictability. We made them question every decision, second-guess every move, and in doing so, we turned the tide of the war. The invaders had come to Earth believing that they could crush us with their superior firepower and advanced technology. But what they didn't realize was that warfare is not just about weapons. It's about strategy. It's about understanding your enemy's weaknesses and exploiting them. And the invaders' greatest weakness was that they didn't understand us. They didn't understand how deeply chaotic, creative, and resilient humanity could be. In the end, it wasn't our weapons or our technology that gave us the advantage. It was our minds, our ability to think outside the box, to manipulate, to deceive, to play with the very rules of warfare. The invaders had come expecting a fight of strength versus strength, but what they found was a war of wit versus calculation. And in that war, humanity was unmatched. As the war dragged on, one thing became clear. This wasn't going to be a quick fight. The invaders had planned for swift domination, overwhelming our defenses in mere days. But when that didn't happen, the conflict turned into a long, grinding war of attrition. And in that war, the true strength of humanity began to emerge, not just in our ability to fight, but in our ability to survive, to adapt, and to rebuild even in the face of utter devastation. The first few months of the invasion saw the collapse of global infrastructure. Cities were in ruins. Governments had either fallen or gone underground, and resources became scarce. Supply chains that had once spanned the globe were severed, and the luxuries of modern life, electricity, clean water, access to food, disappeared almost overnight. It seemed like civilization as we knew it had come to an end. But humanity had been here before. We had survived plagues, wars, natural disasters, and collapses of empires. And in the face of annihilation, we did what we had always done. We adapted. We learned to live without the things we had once taken for granted. We rebuilt, not just with what we had, but with what we could find, scavenge, and repurpose. In the absence of centralized governments, decentralized resistance cells began to form. These cells weren't part of a single unified global resistance, at least not at first. Instead, they grew organically, each group adapting to the unique challenges of their environment. In the ruins of cities, resistance fighters set up bases in the underground metro systems, using the tunnels as shelter from the alien drones patrolling above. In the countryside, farmers and civilians formed self-sufficient communities, pooling resources and knowledge to survive off the land. Each cell was independent, making its own decisions, developing its own tactics. But despite this decentralization, there was a remarkable level of coordination. Messages were passed through hidden networks, couriers who traveled between cells on foot or by bike, relaying information about alien movements, vulnerabilities, and strategies. Even in the most desperate situations, humans found ways to communicate, to share knowledge, and to work together. Survival became a daily struggle, but one that humanity was uniquely suited to face. In the cities, engineers and mechanics scavenged whatever they could from the ruins, repurposing broken machinery and alien wreckage to generate power, clean water, and grow food. Solar panels, salvaged from the rooftops of destroyed buildings, were rigged together to provide electricity for underground shelters. In rural areas, farmers used traditional methods, crop rotation, irrigation, and animal husbandry to keep their communities fed. What had once been relics of the past became the key to survival in the present. But it wasn't just about food and water. Medical supplies, too, became scarce. With hospitals destroyed and supply lines cut, doctors and medics had to improvise. They used alien technology to create makeshift medical equipment. Power cells from downed alien drones were repurposed to run life-saving machines, while alien metals were sterilized and turned into surgical tools. What little medicine remained was rationed carefully, And in some cases, human ingenuity developed new methods of treatment, turning to herbal remedies and alternative therapies that had been long forgotten in the age of modern pharmaceuticals. Human creativity also became a powerful tool. Artists, designers, and thinkers played unexpected roles in the resistance effort. They helped develop camouflage patterns that mimicked the rubble-strewn environments, built decoy structures to confuse alien sensors, and used holographic technology to create false battlefields. In a world where every resource was scarce, human imagination filled the gaps. One of the most remarkable aspects of this decentralized resistance was how quickly leadership structures adapted. Without a central government or military command, leadership emerged naturally within each community. In some places, former military officers took charge, organizing guerrilla operations and managing resources. In others, engineers, farmers, or even teachers stepped into leadership roles, using their knowledge to guide their communities. Decision-making was no longer top-down, as it had been before the invasion. It became collaborative. In small resistance cells, every voice mattered. Decisions were made by consensus, with input from every member of the group. And because each cell was responsible for its own survival, the people in these communities learned to trust one another, to work together, and to rely on their shared strengths. The invaders, of course, weren't blind to what was happening. As they realized that conventional warfare wouldn't bring humanity to its knees, they shifted tactics. They began targeting food supplies, poisoning water sources, and bombing agricultural centers in an attempt to starve us out. But humanity adapted once again. In response, underground farming became a crucial part of the resistance's survival strategy. Hydroponic farms were set up in subway tunnels and basements, growing vegetables with artificial light powered by salvaged alien energy cells. People learned to preserve food in ways that hadn't been used in centuries, drying, salting, and smoking meat and vegetables to store for the long winter months. Every inch of usable space, every ounce of available resource was maximized to ensure survival. But it wasn't just physical adaptation that allowed humanity to endure. It was mental and emotional resilience. The invaders had thought that by destroying our cities, by shattering our governments, they could break our spirits. They believed that we would give up, that we would surrender when faced with overwhelming power. But they didn't understand the human mind. They didn't understand that in our darkest moments, we find strength we never knew we had. As the war wore on, stories of hope and perseverance began to emerge from every corner of the world. There were tales of families who had survived months in the wilderness, evading alien patrols, growing their own food, and living off the land. There were stories of communities that had rebuilt entire towns from the rubble, turning abandoned factories into shelters and workshops. And there were stories of children, born in the midst of the war, who knew nothing of the world before the invasion, but who were growing up strong, resilient, and determined to fight for their future. Even in the face of such horror, humanity's creativity flourished. Music, art, and storytelling became powerful tools for maintaining morale. In underground shelters, musicians would play on makeshift instruments, bringing a moment of peace to those living in constant fear. Artists painted murals on the walls of bombed-out buildings, transforming the ruins into symbols of hope. And storytellers, both old and young, kept the traditions and histories of their communities alive, reminding everyone that no matter how dark the days became, there was always something worth fighting for. Resistance fighters carried these symbols with them into battle. Some painted the names of their fallen comrades on their armor, while others carried small tokens of home, photographs, letters, even pieces of fabric from the clothes of loved ones, as reminders of what they were fighting for. These small acts of remembrance, these moments of humanity, were what kept the resistance going, even when everything seemed lost. Over time, the decentralized resistance began to coalesce into a more coordinated global movement. Resistance cells that had once operated independently started to communicate more regularly, sharing strategies, resources, and information. Underground radio networks, hidden from the invaders' sensors, were established, allowing different regions to coordinate their efforts. Engineers in North America shared their breakthroughs in hacking alien drones with resistance cells in Europe. Farmers in Africa taught communities in Asia how to cultivate crops in extreme conditions. Hackers from South America disrupted alien communications, while scientists in the Middle East worked to reverse engineer alien energy sources. What had started as isolated acts of defiance was now becoming a united front. Humanity, scattered and fragmented as it had been at the beginning of the war, was slowly coming together. And with each passing day, we grew stronger. We learned to adapt not just as individuals, not just as small groups, but as a species. The invaders had come expecting to conquer a divided world, but what they found instead was a united humanity, stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever before. Adaptation wasn't just about surviving in the new world the invaders had created. It was about thriving in it. Humanity wasn't simply holding on, we were evolving. Every challenge the invaders threw at us, we overcame. Every new strategy they employed, we countered. And as we adapted, we grew more dangerous. What the invaders had thought would be our undoing, our fragmented, chaotic nature, became our greatest strength. In the face of extinction, we learned to adapt, to evolve, and to survive. As the war progressed, it became clear that direct confrontations with the alien forces, even with guerrilla warfare, could only get us so far. The invaders' technology was still too powerful, their numbers too great. So humanity turned to another weapon in its arsenal: stealth. If we couldn't outgun them, we could outthink them. We could strike from the shadows, dismantling their war machine piece by piece, without ever revealing our presence. Sabotage became one of the most effective tools in our fight against the invaders. Human operatives, often working alone or in small teams, would infiltrate alien facilities under cover of darkness, planting explosives, hacking systems, and disrupting their infrastructure. These acts of sabotage weren't about large-scale destruction. They were about precision, targeting the right systems at the right time to create maximum chaos with minimal effort. In the beginning, the sabotage efforts were small. Resistance fighters focused on the alien supply lines. They attacked convoys carrying fuel, weapons, and equipment. A single, well-placed explosive could destroy an entire shipment, setting back the invaders' operations for days. But as we became more skilled at this form of warfare, our operations grew bolder. One of the most daring sabotage missions took place in the heart of what had once been New York City. The invaders had transformed the city into a massive command center, with their towering ships hovering above the skyline and their ground forces patrolling the streets. Deep beneath the surface, in what had once been the city's subway tunnels, a group of human operatives had been preparing for weeks. Their target? The invaders' primary power generator, a massive alien reactor that supplied energy to their entire eastern seaboard operation. The operatives, disguised as civilians and moving through the ruins with the help of local resistance fighters, infiltrated the reactor site. It was a heavily guarded facility, surrounded by drones and alien soldiers. But the resistance had learned how to avoid detection. They knew the patterns of the alien patrols, the blind spots in the drone's surveillance, and the weaknesses in the facility's defenses. Under the cover of night, the team slipped into the reactor, planting explosives at key points. These weren't just any explosives. They had been crafted from salvaged alien technology, designed to overload the reactor's energy core and cause a catastrophic failure. When the bombs detonated, the entire facility was destroyed in a blinding flash of light, and with it, the invaders' power grid for the entire region went dark. The blackout left their forces vulnerable, and in the chaos that followed, the resistance launched a series of coordinated attacks, pushing the invaders out of key territories. Sabotage wasn't just about destruction, it was about disruption. Human operatives targeted the systems that the invaders relied on to maintain control. Communication arrays were disabled, leaving the alien commanders blind to the movements of their own forces. Power grids were knocked out, shutting down their drones and cutting off their energy supply. Even their transportation systems were sabotaged, with key supply routes destroyed and alien convoys stranded in hostile territory. One of the most effective strategies involved hacking into the invaders' security networks. Human hackers, operating from hidden bunkers and remote locations, broke into the alien systems, disabling their alarms and surveillance, allowing resistance fighters to move freely through their bases without detection. In one particularly audacious mission, a group of hackers took control of an entire alien base's security system, using it to lock the invaders inside their own barracks while the resistance raided their armory. By the time the aliens managed to break out, their weapons had been stolen, and the resistance had disappeared into the night. Subterfuge, misdirection, infiltration, and deception was another key component of the resistance's strategy. The invaders relied heavily on their advanced sensors and AI systems to detect threats, but these systems were not infallible. Human operatives learned to exploit the gaps in the invaders' technology, creating false signals and leading the aliens into traps. One common tactic was the use of decoy attacks. Resistance fighters would stage a fake assault on an alien installation, drawing the invaders' attention and luring their forces to the site. But while the aliens were focused on the decoy, the real attack was happening miles away. The real attack was happening miles away, where a small team of saboteurs would infiltrate a critical facility and disable it from within. These decoy operations became so effective that the invaders began to question every threat they detected, unsure whether they were responding to a real attack or falling into another human trap. Sabotage and subterfuge weren't easy. They required nerves of steel, precise timing, and a willingness to put everything on the line. The operatives who carried out these missions knew that capture meant certain death. The invaders showed no mercy to those they caught, and the risks were immense. But time and time again, human operatives stepped forward, willing to risk everything for a chance to strike back at the invaders. These saboteurs were the unsung heroes of the resistance. They operated in the shadows, their names often unknown even to their fellow fighters, but their actions had a profound impact on the war effort. Every power grid they disabled, every convoy they destroyed, every communication network they disrupted, it all weakened the invaders, chipping away at their control and creating opportunities for the resistance to strike. Perhaps the most dangerous form of sabotage was the covert operations carried out deep behind enemy lines. These missions were carried out by highly trained operatives, often former Special Forces soldiers, who had spent years honing their skills in stealth, infiltration, and survival. Their targets were the most heavily guarded alien installations, command centers, research facilities, and supply depots. One of the most legendary covert operations occurred in the heart of the invaders' primary research facility in what had once been Geneva. The invaders had repurposed the remnants of CERN, the world's largest particle physics laboratory, turning it into a hub for their own technological research. It was here that they developed new weapons, new drones, and new methods of controlling Earth's population. A small team of human operatives disguised as alien collaborators infiltrated the facility, posing as technicians working for the invaders. Over the course of several weeks, they gathered intelligence, mapping the facility's layout, identifying key targets, and learning the schedules of alien patrols. Then, in a coordinated attack, they disabled the facility's security systems, planted explosives at critical points, and escaped before the bombs detonated. The explosion not only destroyed the research facility, but also set back the invaders' technological advancements by months. These acts of sabotage had a profound psychological impact on the invaders. For all their technological superiority, they couldn't defend against an enemy they couldn't see. The invaders had expected open warfare, where their firepower and advanced technology would guarantee victory. But instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that struck from the shadows, using guerrilla tactics, sabotage, and subterfuge to dismantle their war machine. Every time an alien facility was destroyed, every time a key supply line was cut, the invaders grew more desperate. They began to increase their patrols, deploying more drones and soldiers to guard their installations. But this only stretched their resources thinner, making them more vulnerable to further attacks. The more they tried to clamp down on the resistance, the more their own infrastructure crumbled under the weight of human sabotage. Sabotage wasn't just about the immediate damage it caused, it was about the long-term effects. Beyond military and scientific collaboration, humanity's cultural diversity became a strength, not a weakness. Different cultures brought different ideas to the table, whether it was in strategy, technology, or survival tactics. African farmers shared ancient agricultural techniques that helped resistance groups survive in harsh environments. Japanese engineers worked with Brazilian mechanics to build hybrid machines using both human and alien technology. Indigenous communities from North and South America taught others how to live off the land, to survive without modern conveniences. Even the arts played a role. Artists, writers, and musicians from all over the world contributed to the resistance's morale, using their creativity to inspire hope and unity in the face of overwhelming odds. Propaganda posters, music, and stories of resilience spread through the underground networks, reminding everyone that, no matter how dark things seemed, humanity had survived worse. And this time, we would survive again. On the battlefield, this unity became the key to our survival. Resistance fighters from different nations learned to trust one another, to fight together with a common purpose. In North Africa, an alliance of French, Egyptian, and South African forces launched a daring assault on an alien base hidden deep in the Sahara Desert. The operation was coordinated across multiple time zones using satellite imagery and drone reconnaissance from resistance cells in Europe and North America. It was a logistical nightmare, but it worked. The alien base was destroyed, and the invaders were forced to abandon a key supply route. In the Pacific, a coalition of resistance fighters from Australia, Japan, and the Philippines launched a naval strike against an alien fleet, using salvaged human warships combined with reverse-engineered alien tech. The operation, known as the Battle of the Blue Horizon, was one of the first major victories for the resistance and proved that, when humanity worked together, we could not only survive but win. As the war progressed, the power of unity became more apparent with each passing day. Humanity was no longer fighting as isolated pockets of resistance, but as a global force united by a common purpose. We shared intelligence, resources, and technology. We fought together, bled together, and rebuilt together. The invaders had thought they could break us by striking at the heart of our cities, by destroying our governments, by severing the ties that held us together. But they were wrong. Every act of destruction only brought us closer. Every city that fell only strengthened our resolve. In the face of total annihilation, humanity found its true strength, not in its weapons, but in its people, in our ability to stand together, even when the world was burning around us. In the end, it wasn't just our technology or our tactics that turned the tide of the war. It was our unity. The invaders had come to Earth expecting to conquer a divided world, but what they found instead was a species capable of incredible cooperation, a species that could put aside its differences when it mattered most. This unity, this ability to work together in the face of impossible odds, became our greatest weapon. As the war reached its climax, it was this global cooperation that made the final victory possible. Scientists from every corner of the globe pooled their knowledge to create the technologies that would ultimately defeat the invaders. Soldiers from every nation fought side by side, protecting one another on the battlefield. And ordinary people, the survivors of the early days of the invasion, became the backbone of the resistance, building, healing, and holding the line. The invaders had come to break us, but in the end they only made us stronger. Because when humanity stands united, there is nothing we cannot achieve. The invaders, with their cold logic and advanced technology, thought they had accounted for every possibility. They had studied our military capabilities, analyzed our infrastructure, and calculated the odds of their success with machine-like precision. But there was one thing they couldn't predict, one thing they couldn't understand: human creativity. Where the invaders saw the world in terms of numbers and probabilities, we saw it as a canvas, an endless array of possibilities shaped by the boundless nature of the human mind. Even in the earliest days of the invasion, when everything seemed lost, it was creativity that kept humanity alive. In the ruins of destroyed cities, engineers and mechanics salvaged alien wreckage, not just to replicate their technology, but to adapt it in ways the invaders could never have foreseen. It wasn't just about weapons, it was about thinking outside the box, using what little we had to create something entirely new. Take, for example, the story of a resistance cell in what had once been Detroit. Faced with an overwhelming alien force patrolling the city, they couldn't hope to win in a direct confrontation. So they didn't try. Instead, they turned the ruins of a massive car manufacturing plant into a trap. Using holographic projectors, cobbled together from salvaged alien tech, they created a fake convoy of military vehicles moving through the streets. To the alien drones scanning the area, it looked like a real target, large, heavily armored, and worth destroying. The invaders took the bait, sending their forces to attack the convoy. But when they arrived, all they found were empty streets, and as they attempted to regroup, the real human forces struck from the shadows, disabling the drones and reclaiming a section of the city. This kind of creative problem-solving became a hallmark of the resistance. Where the invaders relied on overwhelming firepower and precision, humans relied on ingenuity. Engineers combined human technology with alien tech in ways that the invaders never expected. In South America, resistance fighters developed a hybrid power grid using scavenged alien energy cells, providing electricity to underground bunkers and outposts. This not only kept the resistance's critical systems online, but also allowed them to operate in areas the invaders thought were completely dark and uninhabitable. In the deserts of North Africa, a team of engineers developed a new kind of weapon using alien energy sources and human ingenuity. They created a solar-powered EMP device that could disable alien drones and walkers without leaving any trace of its human origin. This device, known as the Desert Strike, was responsible for dozens of successful ambushes, crippling the invaders' operations in the region. It wasn't about firepower. It was about using the environment and the technology we had at our disposal in new creative ways. But it wasn't just technical ingenuity that gave humanity an edge. Art and creativity played a vital role in boosting morale, inspiring hope, and even shaping strategy. In the underground bunkers and safe houses where resistance fighters lived, artists and musicians became just as important as soldiers and engineers. They gave people something to fight for, a sense of identity, of culture, of humanity itself. In a world where so much had been destroyed, art became a way to remind people of who they were and what they were fighting to protect. Musicians played on makeshift instruments, creating songs that echoed through the tunnels and ruins. Artists painted murals on the walls of bombed-out buildings, transforming the wreckage into symbols of hope and defiance. These were not just acts of expression, they were acts of resistance. Every song, every painting, every story told in the dark corners of the world was a declaration that humanity was still here, still fighting, still alive. On the battlefield, human creativity took many forms. Resistance fighters didn't just rely on conventional tactics. They invented new ways to fight, new ways to outthink the invaders. In one particularly clever operation, resistance fighters in Eastern Europe used an alien walker they had disabled to create a Trojan horse. They repaired the machine, programmed it to follow a specific path, and filled it with explosives. Then they sent it marching toward an alien command center, where the invaders assumed it was one of their own. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The explosion wiped out half the base, and the resistance gained a critical foothold in the region. In another example, hackers from Asia created a series of false radio broadcasts that mimicked alien command signals, leading the invaders' forces in the wrong direction for weeks. These false orders sent entire squadrons of alien drones on wild goose chases, while the real human forces moved unimpeded through areas the invaders thought were secure. One of the invaders' greatest weaknesses was their inability to comprehend human unpredictability. Their entire war effort was based on logic, on careful calculation and risk assessment. But humans didn't play by those rules. We didn't always act in predictable ways. We took risks. We made decisions based on emotion, on gut instinct, on creativity. And that was something the invaders could never account for. In one notable incident, a group of resistance fighters in the Middle East used a centuries-old tactic dating back to the days of the Ottoman Empire. Knowing that the invaders relied on drones to patrol the skies, the resistance fighters built large mirrors on the ground, creating optical illusions that made it impossible for the drones to detect their movements. The invaders, unable to rely on their sensors, were forced to send in ground troops, where they were ambushed by human forces lying in wait. It was a simple, ancient idea, but it worked. And it worked because the invaders never expected it. Creativity wasn't just about warfare, it was also about survival. As the war dragged on and resources became scarcer, humanity's ability to adapt and innovate became critical. In regions where food supplies were running out, people turned to hydroponic farming, growing vegetables in underground tunnels, using recycled water and artificial light. In areas where alien attacks had poisoned the water supply, engineers developed new filtration systems, using scavenged alien materials, ensuring that communities could continue to thrive even in the harshest conditions. Even in the midst of destruction, people found ways to build. Entire cities, reduced to rubble, were slowly rebuilt by human hands, using whatever materials were available. In some places, alien technology was repurposed to create new forms of architecture, buildings designed to withstand the next attack, to protect the people inside. What had once been tools of war became tools of survival, of hope, of resilience. The invaders had come to Earth believing that their superior technology and firepower would guarantee their victory. But what they hadn't accounted for was the human mind. Our ability to think laterally, to adapt, to create something new out of nothing, that was our greatest weapon. Time and time again, humans used creativity to outmaneuver the invaders, to find solutions where none should have existed. We didn't just survive the invasion, we thrived in ways the invaders could never have anticipated. In the end, it was creativity, more than brute strength, more than advanced technology, that allowed humanity to turn the tide of the war. Where the invaders saw problems, we saw opportunities. Where they saw chaos, we saw possibilities. And where they relied on rigid logic, we relied on the boundless potential of the human mind. The war was not won by guns or bombs. It was won by ideas, by the artists, the engineers, the musicians, the thinkers, and the dreamers who refused to accept the world as it was. They imagined a new world, a better world, and through their creativity, they helped bring it into existence. In the end, the invaders' greatest mistake wasn't their failure to understand our technology or their inability to predict our tactics. It was something far deeper. They underestimated the human spirit, the one force they could never quantify, never measure, and never break. When the invaders first arrived, they believed their victory was inevitable. They saw humanity as a weak, primitive species, scattered across a fragile planet, easy to conquer with their advanced weapons and superior technology. To them, we were just another obstacle to be swept aside. But they didn't understand us. They didn't understand that throughout our history, we have faced challenges far greater than ourselves. We have endured wars, natural disasters, plagues, and the collapse of civilizations. And through it all, we have survived. We have adapted. We have rebuilt. The invaders came to Earth expecting to crush us quickly, to force us into submission through sheer firepower and overwhelming force. But they didn't realize that humanity has never been easily broken. From the very first moment their ships appeared in our skies, we refused to surrender. Even in the face of annihilation, even when the odds were stacked against us, we fought back. Because that's what we do. Across the globe, stories of resilience emerged from the ashes of the war. In the ruins of a bombed-out hospital in London, a group of nurses worked around the clock to treat the wounded, using whatever supplies they could find. They had lost everything, their homes, their families, their city, but they refused to give up. Day after day, they saved lives, even as the invaders continued to bomb the city. They could have fled, could have hidden, but they didn't, because that's what it meant to be human, to keep fighting, to keep caring, even when everything seemed lost. In the frozen wilderness of Siberia, a small community of survivors rebuilt their lives from scratch. They had no electricity, no modern conveniences. All they had was the land, their knowledge, and their will to survive. They planted crops, raised livestock, and built shelters out of the rubble left behind by the invaders. And through sheer determination, they not only survived the brutal winters, but created a thriving community in one of the harshest environments on Earth. It wasn't technology or weapons that saved them. It was their spirit, their refusal to be broken. On the battlefield, this resilience became even more evident. Time and time again, the invaders launched devastating attacks, flattening entire cities, wiping out entire armies. And yet, every time, the survivors would rise from the rubble and fight back. In North America, after the fall of Washington, D.C., resistance fighters continued their battle in the Appalachian Mountains, using the forests and caves as their base of operations. In South America, when Buenos Aires was destroyed, resistance cells spread across the continent, adapting to the terrain and continuing the fight from the jungles and highlands. These were not soldiers trained for war. They were ordinary people, farmers, teachers, mechanics, who had been thrown into a conflict they never asked for. But they fought because they had no other choice. They fought because giving up was not an option. And as the war dragged on, it became clear that the invaders could not break us. No matter how much they destroyed, no matter how many lives they took, humanity endured. We adapted, we rebuilt, and we kept fighting. The invaders couldn't understand it. Their entire strategy was based on the assumption that once they had broken our military forces, once they had destroyed our infrastructure, we would fall in line. But humanity doesn't work that way. We don't surrender. We don't give in. When pushed to the brink, we fight harder. And the more they tried to crush us, the more determined we became to resist. Part of this was our adaptability, our ability to learn and evolve in the face of overwhelming odds. But it was more than that. It was our spirit, our unbreakable will to survive, to protect the ones we loved, to defend our home. The invaders had studied our technology, our military tactics, our societies. But they hadn't studied our hearts. They hadn't realized that we are not just a species of thinkers and fighters. We are a species of survivors. And in the end, it was that unbreakable spirit that turned the tide. The invaders did everything they could to destroy us. They poisoned our water, burned our crops, bombed our cities. But every act of destruction only fueled our defiance. In the streets of bombed-out cities, resistance fighters scrawled messages of hope on the walls. We will not be broken. Still here. Humanity fights back. These were not just slogans. They were declarations of war. They were reminders to every person who saw them that we would not go quietly into the night. Even when the invaders launched their most devastating attacks, we responded with courage and resolve. In one of the darkest moments of the war, when it seemed like the invaders were on the verge of total victory, a global network of resistance fighters launched a coordinated counterattack, striking at alien installations across the world. It was a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to turn the tide, and against all odds, it worked. The invaders, caught off guard by the scale and ferocity of the attacks, were forced to retreat, giving humanity the breathing room it needed to regroup and prepare for the final phase of the war. The invaders had come to Earth believing that they could crush us, that their superior technology and firepower would guarantee their victory. But what they hadn't counted on was our resilience, our capacity to endure. They hadn't realized that no matter how many times they knocked us down, we would always get back up. They hadn't understood that, when pushed to the edge of extinction, humanity doesn't surrender. It fights back, and it fights back with everything it has. In the end, it wasn't our weapons or our technology that won the war. It was our spirit, our refusal to be broken, our determination to survive, and our belief that, no matter the odds, humanity would find a way. The invaders had underestimated us, and that was their fatal mistake. They had come expecting an easy victory, but what they found was a species capable of incredible strength, resilience, and hope. When the final battle came, it wasn't fought with just guns and bombs. It was fought with the unyielding will of every person who had survived the invasion. It was fought by the mothers who had lost their children, by the soldiers who had watched their comrades fall, by the engineers who had rebuilt their cities from the ashes. It was fought by a species that refused to be conquered. The invaders had come to Earth believing they could wipe us out, but in the end, it was our unbreakable spirit that wiped them out. We had survived, we had endured, and we had won. Because no matter how dark the night, no matter how overwhelming the odds, humanity's spirit cannot be broken.